The desert wind howled like a banshee as Jude Mercer guided his horse through the narrow pass, his oilskin coat flapping and dust caking the sweat on his neck. The sky above bled into hues of gold and crimson, the kind of sky that promised nothing but more heat and grit. In his hand, folded and weathered, was the bounty notice. A woman's face, sketched in hurried charcoal strokes, stared back at him. Half pretty, half scared, eyes shaded by suspicion. Asterisk Sarah Clayton. Wanted dead or alive. $200 reward. Asterisk. Jude didn't care much for faces anymore. He cared even less for names. What mattered was the ink at the bottom, signed by Sheriff McCready of Blanco Ridge, with the seal of territorial law burned into the page. That made it real. That made it legal. And if it was legal, then he didn't have to think too hard about what came next. Blanco Ridge sat like a dead man's tooth at the edge of the canyon. One saloon, one sheriff's office, 2 streets, and too many secrets. Jude tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped through swinging doors into smoke and whiskey. Every pair of eyes turned to him, then back to their glasses. He moved like a shadow, quiet, calculated. Behind the bar, a wiry man with a split lip and a mean squint glanced up. "Ain't seen you before." "You're not meant to," Jude replied. He laid the bounty notice on the bar. "She's here." The bartender's eyes dropped. "Ain't seen her." Jude didn't move, didn't blink. The bartender's fingers twitched toward a cloth. "I said, ain't seen her." Jude leaned in, voice soft like rust on iron. "I don't care who she was to you or who you're scared of. If she's here, I find her. If she's not, I ride on. But lie to me again, and I'll drag answers from your bones." The room went silent. Even the piano man stopped playing. The bartender swallowed. "Try the old mining trails north of town. Folks say she's been hiding up there, living wild." Jude nodded once and turned. No thank you. No threats. Just silence. The saloon exhaled as he stepped out. North of town meant canyons, razor ridges and gnarled pines clinging to rocks like stubborn ghosts. As he rode into the narrowing trails, dusk swallowed the sun, and night crawled in. Owls hooted from dark limbs. Somewhere, a coyote barked once and was gone. He dismounted at a shallow stream, let the horse drink, and took a long pull from his canteen. He scanned the terrain, prints in the dirt, too small for a man, too steady for game. Someone walked barefoot, alone, and recently, he followed. The trail led into a thicket of juniper and brush, moonlight flickering through the leaves. That's when he saw her. She stood over a wounded deer, hands shaking as she pressed cloth against the beast's side. Blood stained her arms. Her hair was tangled, face hollow with hunger, eyes too tired to panic. She didn't see him at first. Jude raised his revolver, quiet and sure. She looked up. They stared at each other, him with death in his grip, her with blood on her hands. "If you're here to kill me," she said, voice dry as dust, "do it quick. I'm tired of running." Jude didn't move. She went back to the deer, whispered something Jude didn't catch. Then she stood and wiped her hands on her skirt, tattered and brown from dirt and time. No gold, no gang, just a woman and the weight of the world on her shoulders. Jude lowered the gun, but only slightly. "Sarah Clayton?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Not anymore." He stepped closer. "You're wanted for aiding your husband's crimes. Robbery, murder. 32 men dead at Camp Elias." She looked at him again, tired, not afraid. "Then you got the wrong woman. Your face is on the paper. Then the paper's wrong." He kept the gun raised, but his finger eased off the trigger. There was something off about her, something fragile but fierce, like a candle trying to survive a storm. She stumbled, feverish, pale. She hadn't eaten well in weeks, maybe longer. Jude stepped forward and caught her before she hit the ground. He stared down at her as she sagged in his arms, light as a scarecrow burning up. He should have let her fall, should have bound her hands and dragged her back for the reward. That was the job. Instead, he slung her over his shoulder and carried her back toward the ridge where he'd seen an overhang, dry enough for shelter, hidden enough to avoid company. He built a fire, lit it low and tight. set her down, and peeled off his coat, propping her head against it. The firelight danced across her face, pulling shadows across her hollow cheeks. Jude sat against the stone wall, gun in his lap, and watched her breathe. "Who the hell are you, Sarah Clayton?" He didn't sleep. The stars wheeled above, silent witnesses. In the distance, coyotes sang again, one voice, then many, echoing through the gulch. Sarah stirred once, muttered something in her fever. He didn't recognize the name. Might have been a prayer. Might have been a curse. At dawn, she opened her eyes. He handed her water. She drank slow, cautious. "You take me in?" she asked. "I ain't decided." "You should. I'm worth 200. He nodded. "So I saw." She eyed him, brows furrowed. "You don't look like the others they sent." "I'm not." "You got a name?" He hesitated. "Jude. You always do jobs without knowing who you're killing. Doesn't usually matter." "Well, it should." She looked away, jaw tightening, like something behind her eyes was trying to get out. He didn't press. He'd seen that look before. Men who buried things too deep. Women who'd survived worse than bullets. "I didn't steal from nobody," she whispered. "Didn't help Levi rob that bank. Didn't know he was going to shoot those men. I just ran. Ran till my feet bled. He beat me near dead before I slipped away. You believe me?" He didn't answer. She turned to the fire. Didn't think so. But he did believe her. He just didn't know why. Jude stood and walked to the edge of the ledge. Below them, the land stretched out like a painted sea. Dry, cracked earth and mesas in the distance. He lit a smoke, stared out. "I seen a lot of liars," he said. "You don't talk like one." She smiled, small and sad. "Don't got the energy to lie anymore." Behind them, the fire popped. He turned. "You got folks? Anyone who take you in? They're dead." Levi made sure of that. "And what about him? He's still out there." She nodded. "If he knows I'm alive, he'll come for me." Jude flicked the smoke away and sat back down. "Then we best make sure he don't find you." She blinked. "You're not taking me in?" "Not tonight." "Why?" "Because the woman in that poster ain't the one sitting in front of me. And if I'm wrong, well, I'll have 2 bullets left." She didn't thank him. Just watched the fire and pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The night passed slow. Her fever broke near midnight. She slept deeply this time. Jude kept his eyes on the fire. The next morning, she was stronger. Not by much, but enough to stand. They ate jerky and hardtack. She grimaced through every bite. "You still might turn me in," she said. "I still might. But you won't." "Why is that?" She looked at him, straight. "Because something in you broke a long time ago. Same as me. And you're trying to fix it." Jude didn't answer. He didn't like being read. He saddled the horse, helped her mount behind him. They rode deeper into the hills, away from Blanco Ridge. The trail was narrow, flanked by cliffs and pines. The sun climbed overhead, scorching and cruel. She held tight to his back, silent. As the canyon opened ahead, Jude glanced over his shoulder. "You ever shoot a gun?" "Once," she said. "That's enough." They rode on, dust trailing behind them like ghosts. And in the silence between hoofbeats, Jude realized something that unsettled him more than any bounty or ambush ever had. He didn't want to let her go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Sarah awoke beside the dying embers of the fire, her breath visible in the morning chill. The cave's stone walls echoed with a hush, like the world had paused to let her decide if she wanted to keep living. Her fingers found the blanket draped over her shoulders, rough wool, not hers. She blinked toward the cave's opening and saw him, Jude Mercer, silhouetted against the rising sun, rifle resting across his knees, eyes trained on the distance. He hadn't tied her up. He hadn't left. He could have done both. She sat up, groaning softly as the soreness in her limbs caught up with her. He turned at the sound, but said nothing. His eyes didn't soften, but they didn't harden either. "Didn't expect to wake up free," she said. "You're not." She raised an eyebrow. "Then why am I not in chains?" Jude stood and moved back toward the fire. He crouched and stoked it with practiced motions, adding kindling and blowing until flames danced again. "Figured you'd run if I tied you. Figured you might stay if I didn't." Sarah smirked. That a trick that works on all your bounties? You're the first one I've ever tried it on." She didn't know what to make of that. Part of her wanted to trust him, and part of her remembered too well what trusting men had cost her before. He handed her a strip of dried meat. She took it, chewing slowly, grimacing at the salt and toughness. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Still, she swallowed it down and washed it with a sip from the canteen he passed her. "I meant what I said," she murmured. "I didn't help Levi. I didn't kill anyone." Jude didn't look up. "And I didn't say you did. But you're still bringing me in." "I haven't decided." She leaned forward, voice firmer now. "You think I'm lying?" "I think people do what they have to. Especially out here. I've seen mothers rob trains to feed their kids. Seen preachers slit throats for silver. Truth don't weigh much against desperation." Sarah stared at him. "You think I ran because I was desperate?" "I think you ran because staying meant dying." Silence stretched between them. "You know what he did to me?" she asked. Jude didn't respond. "He burned my father's barn when I said I wouldn't marry him. Shot my brother in the leg when he tried to stop the wedding. Took me to the preacher with my mother's blood still drying on the kitchen floor." Jude's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to hers, the first crack in his composure showing. "I tried to run twice. Both times he found me. First time, he locked me in a root cellar for a week. Second time, he beat me with the butt of his rifle and told his boys to watch." Her voice didn't break. She didn't cry. That part of her had dried up long ago. But Jude saw it, the way her fingers gripped the blanket, the fire in her eyes that hadn't gone out despite everything. "I escaped 2 months ago," she said. "Slipped out while he and his gang were drunk, celebrating some bank job. Didn't take a damn thing but my life. And now he's telling folks I ran with gold? That I was in on it." "Wanted posters don't ask for nuance," Jude said. "They ask for blood," she shot back. He nodded. "That they do." She looked away, toward the canyon. "You think he's looking for me? If he's smart, he's letting the law do it. You don't know Levi." Jude studied her a moment. "Then tell me." She turned back slowly, the firelight catching in her eyes like shards of glass. "He's not smart. He's angry. He's mean. And he don't like being made a fool. He'd rather burn this whole territory to ash than let me go." Jude said nothing, but something inside him settled into certainty. This wasn't a woman on the run from justice. This was a woman on the run from death. "You ever kill a man, Sarah?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Thought about it plenty." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small revolver. He held it out. She looked at it, startled. "What's this?" "Insurance." "I don't want it." "You'll need it." She hesitated, then took it. It felt heavier than it should have, the way truth does when spoken aloud. They broke camp within the hour. Jude helped her onto the horse, riding behind him, arms wrapped loosely around his waist. The air was crisp and dry, the sun painting the rocks orange, as they wound down narrow ridges and into the basin below. They didn't talk much. Jude watched the trail. Sarah watched him. He moved like a man who didn't trust anything, not the land, not the silence, not even himself. Every movement precise, every glance calculating. Yet when she leaned against his back, he didn't flinch, didn't pull away. After 2 hours, he veered off the trail and found a hollow where an old shack slumped in decay. Probably an old prospector's place. It had walls and a roof, which made it paradise in their world. "Stay here," he said, helping her down. "You going somewhere?" "Just scouting the area. Making sure we're not being followed." She didn't argue. Inside the shack, she found a broken chair, a rusted stove, and a pile of shredded canvas. She sat on the floor and stared at the revolver in her lap. When Jude returned, he was tense. "Tracks," he said. 2 riders. Maybe 3. Miles back, but fresh. Her stomach sank. Levi. Could be. He didn't say more. Didn't need to. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "We run. For now." They rode until dusk, cutting across gullies and dry riverbeds. They reached a high ridge as the sun dipped low, bathing the land in blood-red light. Jude dismounted and scanned the horizon through a brass spyglass. "They're still behind us," he muttered. Sarah's voice was flat. You should leave me. Ride east. Tell the sheriff I escaped. You'll still get your reward. Jude gave her a look that made her feel like she'd said something childish. You're not a bounty anymore, he said. You're a target. And what are you? She asked. Right now, he said, checking his rifle. A problem for them. She almost smiled. They found another cave before full night fell. This one deeper, colder. They built no fire. Too risky. Instead, they sat in the dark, backs against stone. Silence wrapped around them like a shroud. I used to believe in things, Jude said suddenly. God. Flags. Justice. She turned to him, surprised. His voice was low, like he was talking to ghosts. After the war, I started taking jobs. Justified it at first. Said I was cleaning up the trash. But after a while, it stopped mattering who they were. Just mattered that someone paid. And me. You made me remember what it feels like to care if someone's lying or not. She let the silence hold that for a while. I never asked for saving, she said. Doesn't mean you don't deserve it. A coyote howled in the distance. Close. Sarah reached for his hand. He didn't move away. Their fingers laced, rough palms and calloused knuckles brushing like they'd done this before in another life. You still don't believe me, do you? She whispered. I want to. Then ask me anything. He turned to her in the darkness. Why didn't you kill him when you had the chance? She paused. Because I didn't want to become him. Jude nodded once. That answer settled something in his chest. Outside, the night deepened. Footsteps rustled faintly beyond the cave entrance. Too careful for animals. Jude reached for his gun. Don't move, he whispered. Sarah froze. A silhouette passed across the mouth of the cave, then vanished. Jude waited, heart pounding, breath held. After a minute, the sound faded. Sarah whispered, They found us. Not yet, Jude murmured, but they will. She looked at him, fear edged with defiance. Then let's not be here when they do. And just like that, they weren't prey anymore. They were running out of time. And Jude Mercer had just made a choice that couldn't be undone. They left the cave before dawn, the stars still scattered like bones across the sky. Jude rode in silence, his eyes always moving, always scanning. Sarah sat behind him again, arms around his waist, not as loosely this time. The trail beneath them was sharp and narrow, winding up into higher ground where the air bit colder and the shadows felt older. Neither of them said much. Words were a luxury when every sound might draw a bullet. As the sun broke over the ridgeline, Jude spotted what he was looking for, Devil's Spine, a knife-thin pass twisting through jagged cliffs. Few dared to cross it. Too easy to fall. Too easy to ambush. But it was the fastest way north. If they could make it through, they'd be beyond the reach of Levi's gang for at least a day. They dismounted at the edge of the pass. It's bad trail, Jude muttered. You slip, it's 100 feet down. Sarah looked at the drop without blinking. Better than getting caught. He gave her a nod. You're getting harder. I ran out of soft a long time ago. They walked the horses, slow and careful, boots crunching on gravel that shifted like loose teeth. The wind howled between the stones, a low, mournful moan that sounded too much like memory. Halfway through the pass, Jude stopped. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer. His hand went to his rifle. Sarah followed his gaze. Ahead, a horse stood tied to a dead tree, riderless, saddle still warm. She drew the small revolver he'd given her. Her hands trembled, but her grip was firm. Jude pointed to a ledge overhead, then to her. He moved off to the right, crouching low, disappearing behind a stone outcrop. She slid behind a boulder and waited, heart hammering. Seconds stretched. Nothing moved. Then, a crack. A shot. Jude fired once, sharp and precise. A scream echoed, short and jagged. Another man shouted back. Then bullets ripped through the air. One pinged off the stone near Sarah's head. She ducked, breathing fast, pulse roaring in her ears. Jude rolled behind cover, reloading calmly. Two of them, he called. One down. Others pinned. Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving. She circled around, remembering the way Levi taught his boys to flank. If they were his, they'd expect Jude to hold the high ground and miss the woman entirely. They didn't know her. She came around the side, saw the second man crouched behind a jut of rock, rifle aimed at where Jude had last fired. She raised her revolver. Her hands shook. Her gut twisted. She had one clear shot. She pulled the trigger. The revolver bucked. The man jerked sideways and collapsed without a sound. She stood there frozen, staring at what she'd done, at what she'd had to do. Jude appeared a moment later, gun still raised until he saw the body. Then his eyes found her. "You all right?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah." "You hit him center mass." "Not bad." She looked at her hands. "Feels bad." "That's how you know it was necessary." They searched the bodies quickly. Both wore faded red bandanas, Levi's mark. No doubt now, he'd found her trail. "We don't have much time," Jude said. They rode hard until the sun burned overhead. Around midday, they found a dry arroyo, hidden by brush, and stopped to rest. Jude tended the horses. Sarah sat with her back against a stone, arms wrapped around her knees. "I never killed a man before," she said after a while. "You did today. Do you remember your first?" Jude sat beside her, stretching his legs. "Too well. He was stealing from a church." "Did you regret it?" "Still do." They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't need filling. Eventually, she asked, "Why you care if I live or die?" Jude glanced sideways. "Because the man I was before wouldn't have. And I don't want to be him anymore." She studied his face. "Did you lose someone?" He hesitated. "A woman. During the war. Her name was Eliza." "What happened?" "She waited for me to come home. I didn't. Not for 2 years. When I finally did, she was gone. No note. No grave. Just gone." Sarah didn't ask more. Some wounds were too deep to prod. "I think that's when I started selling pieces of myself," he added. "One bounty at a time." "You still selling?" He looked at her and shook his head. "Not anymore." That evening, they reached a plateau with a view that stretched forever. Rolling hills and distant pine ridges, a silver ribbon of river catching the last of the light. Jude checked the horizon with his spyglass. Then he stiffened. 3 riders, he said. Moving fast. "Levi." "Could be. They're coming from the south trail. We have 2, maybe 3 hours." Sarah stood, brushing dirt from her dress. "Then we make a count." "There's a narrow ravine down there," Jude said, pointing. "If we hold it, they can't circle us." "You mean fight?" "I mean survive." She looked down at the revolver on her hip. "I've got 5 shots left. Make 'em count." They set up camp not for sleep, but for war. Jude dug shallow cover, positioned rocks for shelter, checked and rechecked his rifle. Sarah gathered ammunition, set traps the way Levi had taught her. Crude but effective. By the time dusk settled, they were ready. Jude looked at her across the fireless camp. "You sure you want to do this?" "I'm tired of running," she said. "I'd rather die fighting than live scared." He nodded. "You've changed." She smiled faintly. "You helped." When darkness swallowed the last light, they waited. The silence was heavier than any words. The wind whispered through the grass. An owl hooted far off. Then hooves. Distant, deliberate, coming closer. Jude took his position behind a rock shelf. Sarah lay prone, revolver resting on a stone, eyes fixed on the pass. Figures emerged, 3 riders, cloaked in shadows. One of them, taller than the rest, dismounted and shouted, "Sarah, you come out now. Maybe I don't hurt what's left of you." Her breath caught. "That's Levi," she whispered. Jude didn't respond. He waited for her cue. Another shout. "You think some Tin Star dog's gonna protect you? I raised you, girl. You belong to me." She raised her gun. Her hands were steady now. Jude whispered, "We shoot when they pass the second marker. Not before." The riders moved forward. Then, a sharp snap, one of the traps triggered. A horse screamed and toppled. Chaos exploded. Jude fired, hitting one rider square in the chest. The second wheeled and tried to retreat. Sarah shot him through the neck. Levi was left. He charged, howling like a demon, gun blazing. Bullets tore into rock and dirt. One clipped Jude's shoulder, spinning him back. Sarah stood. Levi saw her, raised his gun. She shot first. The blast echoed like thunder. Levi stumbled, staggered, and dropped to one knee. Blood bloomed across his coat. "You little witch," he spat. "You ain't got the right." She fired again. This time, he didn't get back up. The silence returned, shattered and raw. Jude groaned, clutching his shoulder. Sarah ran to him, dropping beside him. "You're hit." "Just a graze," he muttered. "You all right?" She nodded, tears finally rising. "I shot him." "You had to." "No," she whispered. "I chose to." He smiled, blood on his teeth. "Good." They sat together, breathing in the stillness. The stars blinked above, uncaring and eternal. Jude closed his eyes. "You saved me." Sarah leaned her head against his. "We saved each other." And somewhere beyond the edge of that canyon, the past finally lost its grip. The first light of dawn painted the canyon in strokes of red and gold, a brutal kind of beauty that didn't ask permission to exist. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons over the rocky ridge where the final shots had been fired. 3 bodies lay still in the dust, Levi Clayton among them, finally silenced, his eyes forever frozen in rage and disbelief. The sound of battle had long since faded, replaced by the morning hush that always came after violence. Sarah sat in the dirt, her back against a warm boulder, hands smeared with blood that wasn't hers. Jude lay beside her, pale and breathing shallow, his shoulder soaked with red. She pressed a torn piece of his shirt against the wound, teeth clenched as she fought panic. "Don't you die on me," she whispered. "You don't get to check out now. Not after all this." Jude opened one eye, barely. "You shot him," he rasped, voice dry as gravel. "I did," she said. He grinned weakly. "Hell of a shot. Hell of a man to bring him here." Jude winced as he tried to shift. "Didn't exactly plan it that way." "Yeah. Well, you don't plan much, do you?" Her voice trembled, but it was steadier than her hands. "First you're gonna kill me, then you're feeding me, then you're bleeding all over the place like you ain't got any damn sense." "Wasn't part of the deal," he muttered. "There was no deal, Jude. That's the problem." He coughed out a laugh that turned into a groan. "Thought bounty hunters were supposed to be emotionally distant." "You were a lousy bounty hunter," she snapped, then pressed harder on his wound when he smirked. "Better man than you were a killer." His smile faded then, and his eyes searched hers. "What happens now?" Sarah looked away, out across the canyon. The world looked different in the aftermath. Quieter. Still too dangerous, but less cruel. "We bury them," she said finally. "Then we ride. Somewhere they won't look. Somewhere we can start fresh." "You think a place like that exists?" She turned back to him. "It has to. Otherwise, what the hell was all this for?" They buried Levi first. No ceremony, no words. Just a shallow grave dug into the hard soil, a rock piled on top to keep the coyotes at bay. Sarah didn't speak during it. She just watched the dust cover the man who'd stolen her past and nearly her future. The others were given the same. No names, no prayers. They'd made their choices. This land didn't forgive, and it didn't forget, but it didn't care either. That was the one mercy it offered. Jude leaned on her as they walked back to the horses. His strength was returning, but slowly. Every few steps, he hissed through clenched teeth, and Sarah would pause, letting him catch his breath. "You sure you're up for riding?" she asked. "No," he said, "but I'd rather die on horseback than wait around to be found by whoever sent those 3. They were Levi's. Maybe. Maybe not." He looked at her, serious now. "Men like him have friends. They'll come looking. Not for you. For revenge." Sarah's jaw clenched. "Then we make sure we're long gone before they do." They rode east, avoiding towns, crossing dried creek beds and lonely ridges where hawks circled overhead like sentinels. Every step put more distance between them and the graves. Every mile felt like another page turning in a story neither of them had expected to write. By the 3rd day, Jude's fever had broken, but he was still weak. Sarah managed the campfires, gathered the water, did the shooting when game crossed their path. She didn't complain. She didn't flinch. She was no longer the woman who'd whispered, "Just do it quick," in the canyon. Jude watched her as she worked, focused, hardened, but not cold. There was a fire in her now, but it didn't burn with fear. It burned with purpose. She had chosen to live, to fight, and it changed her in ways he couldn't stop seeing. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked on the fourth night as they sat around a fire made low and smokeless. "I doubt it," she said, smirking. He chuckled. "I was thinking you might make a better bounty hunter than I ever was." "Not a chance," she replied. "Too many rules. No rules worth following anyway." They sat quiet for a while. "You ever kill someone innocent?" she asked suddenly. Jude looked into the flames. "Once. Mistook him for a deserter I was sent to bring back. Just a kid. Hadn't even fired his rifle." She nodded slowly. "That why you stopped caring?" "For a while, yeah. Figured caring didn't stop anything from happening. Then you showed up." Sarah didn't respond, but her hand reached across the fire and found his. They stayed that way a long time. The following morning, they crossed into pine country, green and clean-smelling. It felt like a new world. They stopped by a river that ran clear and cold. Sarah dipped her hands in and laughed, a small, free sound that startled even her. "I forgot what clean water felt like," she said. "Smells like a place we might not get shot in," Jude added. They found an abandoned cabin that afternoon, half-rotten but standing. With some work, it could be home. Sarah looked at it like someone checking if a dream could hold weight. "We could fix it up," she said. Jude leaned against a post, arm in a sling. "That a proposal?" "I ain't getting married," she shot back. "But I could stand to stop running." "You sure?" "No," she said. "But it beats running on an empty stomach." They spent a week there, cleaning, chopping, stitching broken things into usable ones. Every night, they sat by a fire Jude built with one hand and Sarah's quiet guidance. She cooked. He whittled. They healed, bit by bit. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Jude stepped outside and looked at the trees, the sky, the quiet. "You think we've outrun them?" he asked. Sarah joined him, arms crossed. "Doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because, if they come, we'll be ready. And this time, I'm not the one hiding." Jude smiled at her. "You've changed." "So have you." He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You ever think maybe all that pain, all that loss, maybe it was just to get us here?" She nodded slowly. "Sometimes I do. Other times, I think the world's just cruel, and we're lucky to be breathing." "Maybe it's both." "Maybe." They stood together as twilight fell, two broken things reforged in fire. Later that night, Jude sat with his journal, something he hadn't touched in years. The pages smelled of dust and ink. He wrote slow, his letters clumsy, but honest. "I took the job for silver," he scrawled. "I found something else. Found her. And she ain't no outlaw's wife. She's a woman who lived through hell and came out fighting. She's the reason I ain't a ghost anymore." He closed the book and leaned back. Sarah sat beside him, reading over his shoulder. "Gonna share that with the world?" she teased. He looked at her. "Maybe." She nudged him. "If you do, don't forget to tell Em who saved who." He smiled. "Wouldn't dream of it." She kissed his cheek, then leaned into him, warm and steady. Outside, the trees whispered and the stars returned, scattered across the sky like promises. And far from bounty notices and bloodied pasts, they began something new, quiet, unfinished, but theirs. If you followed this journey, if something in it stirred you, don't just ride off without a word. Like it. Share it. Tell someone. These stories still matter. Because even in a world full of dust and ghosts, there's still room for second chances. The wind tore through the trees like a beast on the hunt, howling across the plains, whipping up dust and dry leaves, and clawing at the ragged buckskin that hung from Nani's thin shoulders. Blood trickled down her inner thigh, hot and sticky, dark against her bronze skin. Her breath came in gasps as she braced herself against a half-dead oak, shielding her daughter with her body. The little girl whimpered, her tiny fingers clutching at her mother's waist, eyes wide with confusion, fear, and something far worse, resignation. "They left us," Nani whispered, her voice more wind than words. She wasn't speaking to the child. She was speaking to the sky, to the trees, to the spirits that surely had turned their backs. Her tribe had called her cursed. The Comanche did not abandon their own without reason, and yet here she was, cast out like refused because of dreams and whispers, omens and suspicion. Because she had dared to carry life during a season of war and death. Because her husband had died with an arrow in his throat and a look of blame in his glassy eyes. Because she had survived and they needed someone to blame. Her belly, swollen with the weight of a child nearly ready to arrive, ached from within. The pain came in sharp pulses now, rolling over her like waves crashing into a sinking canoe. She gritted her teeth and swallowed her screams for her daughter's sake. The child's small, dark-eyed, dirt-smeared, watched her with a silence too old for 5 years. "I'm sorry," Nani murmured, brushing a strand of tangled hair from her daughter's face. "We will not die here. I won't let us." But the wind answered back with nothing but bitter cold. They had walked for 2 days without food, stumbling through sparse woods and across frozen creeks, the early spring offering no warmth and no mercy. The moccasins she'd worn had long since split open at the soles. Her feet were raw and bleeding, each step a test. Her daughter, light as she was, could no longer be carried. And now the contractions came closer together. Her body had betrayed her. It had chosen this moment, this impossible moment, to bring new life into a world that had no place for it. She slid down the tree, gasping, her legs giving out. Her daughter knelt beside her, pressing her small hands to her mother's face. "Mother," the girl asked in broken English, the language she'd picked up from old traders. Nani blinked at her. That word, that fragile word. What did it mean to be a mother when death circled like vultures overhead? A sudden movement in the trees made her flinch. A rabbit startled. Or a wolf. Or worse. She tightened her grip around her daughter, one hand slipping instinctively to the small flint knife strapped to her leg. The blade was dull, barely able to cut bark, but it was the last weapon she had. Night was coming. The sky turned purple and gray, bruised like her spirit. She knew what would happen if she gave birth out here. She had seen women die in warm lodges, surrounded by family, with herbs and midwives, and chanting to guide the baby into the world. Out here, it would be agony. The cold would sap her strength. Infection would fester. And her daughter would be alone. The thought dug deeper than the pain in her belly. She tried to pray, not to any god she knew, but to the dirt, to the sky, to anything that would listen. "Let her live," she whispered. "Take me if you must, but let her live." The wind howled again, this time with a voice that wasn't hers. Hooves. Slow. Measured. A horse. Nani froze, heart hammering in her chest. Her daughter looked up, eyes wide, clutching her mother's arm. A dark figure emerged from the tree line. A man on horseback, wrapped in a long coat, wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes. A rifle rested across his lap. He wasn't Comanche. That much was clear. His skin was pale, his beard unkempt, and his expression unreadable beneath the hat's shadow. He reined the horse to a stop, just far enough not to spook them, and looked down at the huddled pair beneath the oak. The woman, the child, the blood, the knife clutched in a trembling hand. He didn't move for a long moment. Neither did she. Then, slowly, deliberately, he swung down from his saddle. The horse snorted and pawed at the dirt, sensing tension. The man held his hands out to the sides, palms up, showing he carried nothing in them. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low and rough as gravel. She said nothing, just tightened her grip on the knife. Her breath came in shallow bursts now, pain stabbing through her belly again. The man took a cautious step forward, his eyes flicking from her face to the child, then to the blood. "You're gonna die out here," he said plainly. "Both of you." Still, she didn't speak. Another step. Closer now. "You need help," he added. "I've got a cabin not far. Fire. Food. A bed. You won't make it through the night out here." She shook her head once. Quick. Desperate. "I'm not the enemy," he said, kneeling in the dirt about 6 feet away. "Not looking to hurt women or children. Just hunting deer. Found you instead." The girl looked at him, then up at her mother. Nani could barely sit up now. The knife slipped from her hand and fell to the dirt with a soft thud. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed sideways, unconscious. The man didn't wait. He rushed forward, catching her just before her head hit the roots. He scooped her up with effort. She was heavier than she looked, between exhaustion and pregnancy. She groaned in his arms. He looked at the little girl, who stared at him like a cornered fox. "She yours?" he asked. The girl nodded once. "Can you walk?" Another nod. "Good. Stay close." He carried the woman to the horse and hoisted her over the saddle as gently as he could. She moaned again, then went still. Her belly was hard beneath the blood-soaked leather. The baby was coming, and fast. The man looked at the little girl. "Name?" She hesitated. "Tiva." "I'm Silas," he said. "Come on, Tiva. Stay close. We'll get her warm." The girl followed. The three of them disappeared into the forest, the trees swallowing them whole. The night deepened, and far behind, the wind howled again. It was nearly dark when Silas reached his cabin, a squat log structure nestled between hills, nearly hidden from the main trail. He opened the door with his boot and laid the woman down on his bed. The fire had gone low. He tossed on wood, stoking it to life. He grabbed a worn wool blanket from a trunk and covered her. She shivered. Blood had soaked through her leggings. The contractions were coming quick now. He didn't need a midwife to see that. "Tiva," he said, looking to the girl who stood near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself. "There's a bucket. Get some water from the barrel outside." She nodded and darted out. Fast. Quiet. Silas washed his hands in cold water. They were trembling. He hadn't helped deliver a baby since his own had been born, stillborn years ago. He hadn't touched a woman since. He cursed under his breath, grabbed a knife, and began cutting strips from a clean shirt. He worked quickly, talking softly as he did. "You're not going to die here, lady. I won't let you." The woman groaned, her eyes fluttering open for a second. Pain etched across her face. "Breathe," he said. "Stay with me. You're stronger than this storm." Tiva returned with the water. He dipped cloth into it, cleaned what he could. The woman cried out. The baby was coming. Time lost meaning after that, just blood, heat, and screams. He worked on instinct and panic, but finally the baby came, silent at first, then with a shrill cry that echoed in the tiny cabin. A girl. He wrapped her in a wool cloth and handed her to Tiva, whose eyes widened in awe. She clutched her little sister like something made of glass. Silas slumped back, exhausted, blood on his arms, his shirt soaked. The mother was breathing, barely. He sat down on the floor beside the bed and stared into the fire. "What the hell have I just gotten into?" he muttered. Tiva didn't answer. She just watched her mother watch the fire and held the baby tight. Outside, the wind quieted. But in the woods, something still watched. Morning crept in slow, dragging pale gray light across the forest. Fog clung low to the earth like breath held too long. Inside the cabin, the fire had dimmed to coals, and smoke drifted lazily in the air. Silas sat on a wooden stool, elbows resting on his knees, hands slick with dried blood and sweat. He hadn't slept. He hadn't dared. The woman, Nani, he'd overheard the girl whisper the name, lay pale and still on his cot, wrapped in every blanket he could find. Her skin was damp, her breathing shallow. The baby, swaddled tight in a worn flannel shirt, had fallen asleep in the crook of her sister's arms. Tiva hadn't moved from that spot all night. Silas watched the girls. Tiva stared at him in return, silent, still, like some wild animal unsure whether the man across the room meant to offer food or set a trap. She blinked slowly, her eyes older than they should have been. That look struck him harder than any bullet could have. He remembered it. He'd worn it once, long ago, when everything he'd known had died in the span of a week. He ran a hand over his unshaven jaw, the bristles sharp and itchy. His body ached from holding Nani up through the worst of her labor, from kneeling on hard floors, from tension that hadn't let go yet. But something in him, something he thought long gone, refused to leave them. Not after what he'd seen. Not after hearing her scream into the night and still cling to life with a fire that refused to burn out. He stood, stretched slowly, joints popping, and moved to the hearth. The girl flinched slightly. He stopped short, raising a hand. "I'm just putting on water," he said gently. Tiva didn't respond, but her shoulders eased a little. He stoked the coals, added kindling, and soon the fire snapped to life. The scent of wood smoke filled the air. He poured water from a jug into a tin pot and set it above the flames. Minutes passed. Nani stirred. She gasped sharply, hand reaching out before her eyes opened. Silas crossed the room quickly and crouched beside the bed. "You're all right," he said softly. "You're safe." She blinked, breathing hard, lips cracked. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "Don't try to move too quick," he added. "You lost a lot of blood." Her eyes darted around the cabin, landing on the baby, then on her older daughter. Relief flooded her face, and she relaxed just a little. Then her gaze found Silas again, hard, untrusting. "I'm Silas," he said, sensing the questions in her eyes. "I found you out in the trees." "You were," he glanced down. "You wouldn't have made it through the night." She stared at him, unmoving. "You delivered the child?" she asked, her voice hoarse and broken. He nodded once. "Did what I could." There was a long silence between them. Then, slowly, Nani reached for her baby. Tiva gently passed the child over, and she cradled the infant to her chest, murmuring soft, melodic words Silas didn't understand. "She all right?" he asked. "She's strong," Nani replied. "Like her sister." Silas looked at Tiva again. The girl sat straighter, pride glowing in her eyes for the first time. "She's got your fight," he said. Nani narrowed her eyes slightly. "Why help us?" That question had been waiting. He knew it was fair. He didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense. "'Cause someone should have," he said at last. "That's all." Her expression didn't change, but she looked down at the baby again, arms tightening slightly around the child. "I'm not looking for anything," he added. "You're free to leave once you're strong enough. I ain't holding you here." "And where would I go?" she asked bitterly. "I am hunted by my people and feared by yours." Silas looked away. He knew the feeling of being unclaimed, of belonging nowhere. "You can stay here," he said, "for as long as you need." Nani didn't answer, but she didn't refuse either. By midday, she had enough strength to sit up with her back braced against the log wall. Silas fed the fire, cooked broth from dried venison and roots, and set the steaming bowl near her. She accepted it without thanks, but not without hunger. She sipped slowly, wincing at the heat, but drank it all. Tiva moved to sit beside her mother, resting her head gently on her shoulder. Nani's hand moved to the girl's hair, fingers tangling in it with quiet affection. Silas watched the moment, felt something stir deep inside, something like memory or longing. He turned away, busied himself cleaning the space. The cabin was small, one main room, a hearth, a cot, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves stacked with simple tools and canned goods. He'd built it years ago with his own hands after riding west, running from ghosts and debts, and a war that had taken too many names. It had suited him fine being alone. Until now. As the day wore on, Nani spoke little, but Silas noticed the way her eyes followed everything, his movements, the sounds outside, the way her daughter moved through the space. She was always watching. She didn't trust him. That was smart. He fixed a second cot that evening, spreading a straw-stuffed mattress near the hearth, covering it with thick blankets. He gestured to it. "Sleep there. It's warmer." "I will sleep here," she said, voice even. Silas didn't press. He nodded and stepped outside, letting the door thud shut behind him. The air outside was crisp. The forest whispered with night birds and the soft rustling of trees. He lit a pipe, leaned against the railing, and stared up at the stars. Too many nights, those stars had looked like judgment. Now they looked like questions. What was he doing bringing them here? What was he inviting in? Inside the cabin, Nani lay back slowly, every movement stiff with pain. Her daughter curled beside her, the baby nestled between them. She stared at the roof beams above, listening to the fire crackle, feeling warmth soak into her bones. She remembered the cold, the dark, the edge of death. She remembered Silas's hands, rough, trembling, but careful. She didn't trust him, but she didn't fear him. She slept lightly, waking to every creak of the logs and shift of the wind. At one point, she saw Silas by the fire, adding wood, moving slowly. She didn't speak, and neither did he. The next morning, she was stronger. She sat upright, fed the baby, and even managed a few steps across the room with Tiva's help. Silas offered her fresh bread and a bit of jam. She ate without comment. "Your daughter," he said at one point. "She's smart, quiet, got good sense." Nani nodded. "She has survived. That makes her wise." They were simple words, but the weight of them pressed down on Silas like a boulder. He glanced toward Tiva, who sat near the door, playing quietly with a bit of twine she turned into a loop. He crouched down beside her, holding out a small wooden carving, a bear roughly whittled from pine. "Here," he said, "something to hold." She looked at the carving, then at her mother. Nani gave a slight nod. Tiva took it, held it like it might crumble. Then, with the smallest smile, she looked up and said, "Thank you." Silas tipped his hat. "Ain't nothin'." That evening, as they sat in silence while the stew bubbled and the fire snapped, Nani spoke without looking at him. "My husband died in a raid. My people blamed me, said I carried death inside me. They told me to leave or be left to rot. So I left." Silas said nothing for a while, just stirred the stew. "I had a wife," he replied eventually, "and a son. Fever took them. I left too. Didn't know where else to go." For a while, there was only the sound of fire and broth. Then Nani said, "This place is quiet." Silas looked around the cabin. "It's lonely," he admitted, "but I reckon it don't have to be." She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. As the moon climbed high and the fire burned low, the cabin in the hollow felt less like a place for hiding and more like a place waiting to be filled. Outside, unseen in the dark, the wind shifted. Not cold now, but changing, watching, and far off in the trees, a footprint slowly filled with melting snow. The morning sun filtered through pine branches, casting long golden bars across the cabin floor. Smoke curled from the chimney, and inside, warmth and quiet had taken root, softening the hard edges of winter. Silas stood outside, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, eyes flicking to the tree as he worked. The rhythm of the blade against stone was steady, precise, but his shoulders stayed tight, his jaw clenched. Something had changed in the woods. He couldn't explain it, not in words. Just a shift in the way the birds moved. In the silence between the wind. Too still, too quiet. Nani watched him from inside the cabin, her daughter perched beside her, weaving twine into a makeshift doll. The baby slept in a woven basket near the hearth, bundled in soft hides. Peace had started to root here, tentative and brittle, like the first crocus pushing through thawed earth. Silas had given them safety, warmth, and the dignity of healing. But Nani knew well enough that peace was never more dangerous than when you believed it permanent. He returned near midday, carrying a hare in one hand and a strange look in his eyes. He laid the catch on the table, wiped his hands on a rag, and stared at her. "There were boot prints," he said, voice low. Nani stiffened. "North side of the ridge," he continued. "2 sets. Maybe 3. Not yours. Not mine. And not fresh enough to be just passing through." She stood slowly, careful not to wake the baby. "Who are they?" He shook his head. "Could be hunters. Could be worse. Don't like the way they moved. Too close to the tree line. Watching." Nani's fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt. "You have enemies?" Silas met her gaze without blinking. "I have a past." She didn't press. Didn't have to. Everyone who lived this far from civilization was running from something. He moved through the cabin with practiced focus, checking the rifle, counting ammunition, making mental lists of supplies. The air grew tight with preparation. Survival had a scent, wood smoke, sweat, iron, and it filled every corner. Later that night, he sat on the porch again, a loaded rifle across his lap. The moon rose full and watchful, silvering the leaves. Nani stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself, and sat beside him without a word. They listened to the forest. "They find us," she said finally. "What then?" "We fight," he replied. She nodded. There was no fear in her voice, only certainty. I will not let them take my daughters. Silas looked at her then, the curve of her face illuminated by moonlight, eyes fixed on the trees like she could stare danger into stillness. You know how to shoot? He asked. She gave a faint smile. Not well, but I have good aim with a blade. He chuckled, dry and low. You'll do. The next morning, he set a rifle in her hands. She held it awkwardly at first, but she learned quickly, adjusting her stance, correcting her grip, eyes narrowed with focus. He showed her how to brace against the recoil, how to exhale before squeezing the trigger. She missed the first 2 shots, but the third cracked the air and splintered a bottle set on a fence post. Tiva watched from the cabin doorway, eyes wide with wonder. When Silas handed her a small slingshot, her smile bloomed like summer sunlight. She took to it faster than her mother, sending pebbles zipping through the air with uncanny accuracy. One ricocheted off the doorframe and nearly clipped Silas's hat. He raised a brow. Remind me not to get on your bad side. Nani allowed herself a laugh, short but real. It felt strange on her tongue, but joy was fleeting. That afternoon, Silas ventured to check the ridge again. The prints were clearer now. 3 men. Heavy boots. One dragged a foot slightly, old injury maybe. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be found. He knelt beside one track, frowning. The tread matched a pattern he hadn't seen in years. Military issue. Or close enough. As he rose, a branch cracked behind him. He spun. A figure stepped out from the trees, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a patchwool coat and a smug grin beneath a thick beard. Well, well, the man drawled. Silas Kane. Ain't this something? Silas leveled his rifle in an instant. Jeb Cartwright. A bounty hunter turned outlaw. They'd served together once briefly, until Jeb had murdered a marshal and fled into the hills. Silas had assumed him long dead. Didn't think you'd hole up with a squaw and 2 little ones, Jeb continued, nodding toward the smoke curling from a cabin chimney. Real cozy setup you got. Silas's finger twitched near the trigger. You've got about 3 seconds to turn around. Easy now, Jeb said, spreading his hands mockingly. I got no quarrel with you. Word just got out. $50 bounty on a Comanche woman and her kid, seen north of the pass. Tribal folks want her dead. Whites want her captured. Either way, someone's paying. And where there's gold. You think I'd sell her out? Silas growled. Jeb tilted his head. Didn't figure you for the sentimental type, but I've been wrong before. A second figure appeared behind Jeb. A wiry man with a scar down his cheek and a rifle slung loose over his shoulder. More followed, 3 in all. They fanned out slowly. Silas backed away, steps measured. You come to my cabin, you won't leave upright. Jeb smiled wider. We'll see about that. By the time Silas returned to the cabin, blood thundered in his ears. He barred the door. Nani stood, alert, baby in arms, while Tiva clutched her doll tightly. They're coming, he said simply. She nodded once. How many? 3. Maybe more. We fight. We fight. They prepared as best they could. Silas loaded both rifles, stashed knives in reachable places. Nani set boiling water on the stove, an old trick, but a painful one. Tiva helped carry ammunition, her small hands trembling but steady. There was no time for fear now, only grit. As dusk fell, the forest grew still again. Then a whistle. Silas stood by the window, rifle raised. Voices drifted through the trees. Come on out, Kane. Let's not make this messy. Nani pressed her back to the wall, eyes scanning the shadows. Tiva crouched beneath the table, baby beside her in the basket. Silas didn't speak, didn't answer. He waited. A shot rang out, splintered the doorframe. Silas fired back, shattering the tree trunk where Jeb had hidden. Screams echoed. Return fire lit up the clearing. Chaos erupted. A window shattered. Nani threw the boiling water through it. A scream following the scalded yelp on the other side. Silas ducked, fired again, clipped someone's leg. The man shrieked, dropped behind a bush. Another shadow moved for the door. Silas turned, too late. The door burst open. A man stormed in, gun raised. Tiva screamed. Nani lunged forward, knife flashing. She drove the blade deep into the man's side. He staggered, dropped the gun. Silas finished him with a clean shot to the chest. One down. Outside, the rest scattered, rattled, wounded, not ready for this kind of fight. Jeb's voice rang out, furious. "You're dead, Kane. You hear me? You and your damn red woman." Another shot. Then silence. They waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. "They're gone," Silas said finally, lowering the rifle. Nani sagged against the wall, breathing hard. Tiva ran to her, burying her face in her side. The baby wailed, but quieted when pressed to her mother's chest. Silas looked around the room. Blood stained the floor. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Smoke drifted from the fireplace, mingling with the iron scent of violence. "They'll be back," Nani said. He nodded grimly. "Not if we find them first." She met his gaze. No fear. Only fire. "I will not run," she said. "You won't have to." The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open. Outside, the trees stood dark and silent again, but the silence had teeth. They weren't finished. Not yet. The morning after the attack dawned red and angry. A sharp wind hissed through the hollow, dragging the scent of blood and gunpowder from the splintered cabin door into the wild. Smoke rose thin from the chimney. Inside, silence clung to every corner, but it was not fear anymore. It was resolve. Silas finished patching the door, with rough boards scavenged from a lean-to. His knuckles were split, blood crusted around the nails. Every joint ached, but his hands worked fast, methodical. Last night had changed everything. They'd been found. And he knew men like Jeb Cartwright didn't slink off into the trees unless they planned to come back with fire and fury. Nani stepped into the light beside him, her rifle slung across her back, one arm cradling the baby, the other resting near the hilt of a knife at her waist. Her movements were slower than before. The healing had not finished, but there was something different in her eyes. A hard clarity. She had bled in this place, fought for it. It was hers now, too. "They won't stop," she said, not asking. "No," Silas replied. "Not unless we stop them first." She shifted the baby to her other hip and glanced toward the tree line. "Then we go. Before nightfall." The plan came together like clockwork. Silas knew the land. He had mapped it in solitude, drawn it in the back of his mind 1,000 times while wandering alone. There was a rocky outcrop 3 ridges west, a natural choke point. If Jeb and his men were hunting them, they'd pass through it, cocky, thinking they had the high ground. Silas had ambushed men there before. He would do it again. By mid-morning, they were packed. Tiva clutched her doll and a small bundle of dried meat. She did not cry, did not speak, only walked between her mother and Silas like a child used to running. Nani moved with calm precision, baby strapped to her chest, eyes scanning the horizon as if she were already hunting. They left the cabin behind without looking back. The trail twisted through frozen underbrush and narrow deer paths. Silas led them with his rifle in hand. His coat flapped in the wind, his hat pulled low. Nani followed close, her boots sure on the uneven terrain. Tiva kept pace, quiet as a shadow. At the ridge, they stopped. Silas crouched behind a craggy boulder and scanned the woods below. The air was deathly still. A crow flapped once, landed, then stilled. The forest watched with bated breath. Nani set the baby in a nest of furs between 2 rocks. Tiva curled beside her, arms wrapped protectively around the infant. Silas and Nani positioned themselves on opposite flanks, rifles loaded, breathing slow and deep. They waited, and then the woods stirred. Voices, footsteps, Jeb's drawl cutting through the trees like a saw blade. He laughed, loud, careless, confident. "Found the cabin empty," he called. "Thought you'd run, Silas, but I know you better than that." Silas didn't move, didn't blink. Jeb stepped into the clearing beneath the ridge, 3 men at his back, rifles loose in their hands. They walked slowly, eyes sweeping the rocks. One man spat into the dirt. "I give you one more chance," Jeb shouted. "Turn over the woman. You can walk away." From her position, Nani stood. The crack of her rifle split the air. The man beside Jeb dropped, blood blooming across his chest. Silas fired next. The second man spun, fell into the brush. Panic erupted. Jeb scrambled for cover, screaming orders. The third man fired blindly, but his shot went wide. Silas emerged from behind his rock and moved fast, his boots crunching gravel. One well-placed shot, and the last man dropped. Only Jeb remained. He backed up against a pine, breathing hard, rifle shaking in his hands. "Kane," he shouted, "don't be a damn fool. You can't protect her forever." Silas stepped into the clearing, rifle leveled, cold fury burning in his eyes. "You don't get to say her name," he said. A shot rang out. Jeb fired first, his bullet grazing Silas's coat. Silas didn't flinch. He squeezed the trigger. Jeb's body jerked, rifle falling from his hands as he collapsed in the snow, blood blooming beneath him. Silence fell again. A terrible, final silence. Nani stood at the edge of the ridge, breath misting in the cold air. Her rifle lowered slowly. "It's over," she said. Silas didn't answer right away. He just stared at the man on the ground. The past had died with Jeb Cartwright, and yet the weight of it still pressed on his shoulders. But when he looked up at Nani, something eased. Not forgiveness, there was too much history for that. But maybe peace. They returned to the cabin by dusk. It stood waiting, smoke still curling from a chimney. The door hung straight now, repaired. The blood was gone from the floor. The place looked almost unchanged. But inside, everything was different. That night, they sat around the fire, the baby cooing softly, Tiva nestled between them with her doll tucked under her chin. The room was warm, lit in amber and gold. Outside, snow began to fall in slow spirals. Nani watched the flames. Her fingers brushed the baby's cheek. "I thought I was dead," she said. "When I lay under that tree, I thought I was already gone." Silas stirred the fire. "I thought I was done with people, with kindness. Thought the world had no place left for it." She looked at him. "You saved us." He met her eyes. "You saved me back." They were quiet for a moment. Then Tiva, her voice soft and hesitant, asked, "Can we stay here?" "Forever." Silas looked at Nani. She looked at him. "I reckon we can," he said. The baby sneezed, a tiny, sharp sound. They all laughed, and the room filled with something rare and whole. Weeks passed. Snow melted. Spring crept back over the land, shy and bright. They planted seeds in the soil behind the cabin. Silas built a second room. Tiva gathered flowers and learned to read from old books stacked in a chest. Nani hunted with Silas, laughed with him, argued, and worked beside him. The baby grew strong, her cries fierce and full of life. One morning, under the tall pine where Silas had once buried his grief, they exchanged vows. No preacher, no crowd, just a circle of stones, the sky above them, and the forest for witness. He held her hands and said, "You brought me back." She answered, "You gave me something worth staying for." Tiva scattered petals and beamed. The baby babbled as if offering her own blessing. And the fire that burned in that cabin was no longer just warmth against the cold. It was hope forged in blood and loss. It was something new. If you listen closely, some nights you can still hear laughter in the hollow. Not the hollow kind that echoes off empty walls, but the full, rich kind born of survival, born of love, born of a promise that no matter what the world tried to take from them, they would build something stronger, something that would never burn again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice matters, just like every life in the wild does.